The year was 1842, and the land of Virginia was a place caught between the quiet traditions of the past and the creeping changes of a new age. The village of Cold Creek sat hidden between rolling hills and heavy forests, where life moved slowly and little ever changed. Families were bound together by work, faith, and superstition. In that town, every life seemed predictable, every fate carved out long before birth. Yet one winter night, when the snow pressed against the rooftops and the wind howled through the trees, something happened that no villager would ever forget. The Parker family lived on the edge of Cold Creek. They were farmers, modest and plain, not rich, not poor, and not known for any peculiarities. John Parker was a man of discipline, a man who believed that God's will ruled over everything. His wife Margaret was a quieter soul, gentle and prone to long silences. When Margaret went into labor that December, the midwife and a few neighbors gathered in the candle-lit room of their farmhouse, expecting nothing unusual. But by the time dawn broke, 2 daughters had been born, and something in the room felt strange, unsettling, though no one could explain why. The twins were named Eleanor and Eliza. They were healthy, their cries strong, their bodies perfectly formed, but as the midwife swaddled them, she felt a chill run down her spine. The girls did not cry separately. They cried together, the same pitch, the same length, as though one voice was split into 2 mouths. Some dismissed it as coincidence, but others exchanged looks in silence. The midwife would later confess she had never seen such a thing. As months passed, the strangeness grew. The girls laughed at the same time, spoke their first words together, and when one turned her head, the other followed in the exact same motion. Their mother adored them, yet there were moments when she would stare into their matching eyes and feel a quiet dread, as though she were being watched, not by children, but by something that understood her far too well. By the time they were 4, the whispers had already begun in the village. Children spoke of seeing Eleanor and Eliza talking to each other without moving their lips, their mouths closed, but their eyes locked in silent conversation. Farmhands swore that when one girl scraped her knee, the other cried as though she felt the same pain. Still, the Parkers kept them home, away from most of the village, teaching them in secret and avoiding gatherings where their behavior would draw attention. But some things could not be hidden. One evening, during a Sunday service at the small wooden church in the center of Cold Creek, the twins sat beside their parents, heads bowed. The preacher was delivering a sermon about sin and salvation, his voice rising with each word, when suddenly the 2 girls lifted their heads. At the same instant, in the same voice, they spoke a name, the name of an old farmer seated 3 rows ahead. The sound cut through the sermon like a blade. The congregation froze. The farmer turned, bewildered, and demanded to know what the girls had said. The Parkers hurried them out, their faces pale, but by the next morning, the entire village knew. The girls had spoken a man's name during prayer, and 3 days later, that same man was found dead in his barn, his body twisted beneath the weight of a fallen beam. The villagers whispered that it was no accident. Some swore the twins had cursed him. From then on, fear clung to the Parker family like a shadow. Wherever the twins went, people crossed themselves, muttered prayers, or looked away. Yet the girls did not seem frightened by the suspicion. If anything, they appeared amused. At times they would stand hand in hand at the edge of the Parkers' field, watching villagers pass on the road, their faces blank, their lips curled in the faintest of smiles. And if 2 voices rose in perfect unison, whispering a name, people trembled, for in Cold Creek, whispers had become omens. The Parkers tried to shield their daughters, insisting it was all superstition, that children's games had been mistaken for something darker. But the events kept piling. A young boy swore he had seen the twins at the river, pointing at the water and chanting words he could not understand. Days later, a fisherman drowned, his boat capsized in calm water. A merchant who mocked the Parkers at the tavern fell ill, his body fevered, his mind raving about two sets of eyes staring at him from his window at night. He died within a week. Margaret Parker, the mother, grew weaker with every passing month. She loved her daughters, but the weight of the village's fear broke her spirit. She began to wake in the night, startled by the sound of the twins whispering in their sleep. She would creep into their room, the moonlight falling across their small beds, and hear them speaking the same words at the same time, words in a language she had never heard before. And when she tried to rouse them, both would open their eyes at once, wide and cold, and stare at her until she fled the room. John Parker, stubborn and faithful, refused to believe the rumors. But one night, even he could not ignore what he saw. He had returned late from the fields, his lantern flickering as he entered the house. He found Eleanor and Eliza standing at the foot of their mother's bed, both of them holding hands, both chanting in unison. Margaret lay still, her face pale as when John shouted their names. The girls turned toward him, their voices still joined, their eyes shining with a strange light. Margaret lived, but she never spoke again after that night. By 1849, when the girls were only 7, the Parkers were prisoners in their own home. The church elders had come to John, urging him to deliver the children into their care, claiming they would pray over them and cast out whatever spirit had taken hold. But John refused, locking the doors, keeping his daughters close. Yet even he could not deny the truth any longer. The twins were no longer simply unusual children. They were something else, something he did not understand, and perhaps did not want to. The breaking point came on a stormy evening in August. Thunder rolled over the hills, rain battered the farmhouse, and in the midst of it, the twins vanished. Their beds were empty, their blankets neatly folded, their shoes lined by the door. No one had seen them leave. No footprints were found in the mud, no tracks in the grass. They were simply gone, as though the storm had swallowed them whole. When the villagers searched the woods, they found nothing. When they dragged the river, it yielded no bodies. The Parker house stood silent, Margaret mute, John broken, and in Cold Creek, whispers turned into legend. The children who spoke in unison had disappeared without a trace, leaving only questions that would never be answered. Some claimed they had been taken by angels. Others insisted they had been dragged into the depths by demons. But there were those who believed something far more terrifying, that the twins had never left at all, that they still walked among the villagers in some unseen form, watching, waiting, their voices ready to rise again in perfect, damning unison. The disappearance of Eleanor and Eliza Parker spread through Cold Creek like wildfire, and with each retelling the story grew darker. Some said their father John had finally given in and delivered them to the church elders in secret. Others whispered that he had killed them to protect the village from their curse. But there were no bodies, no confessions, no proof of any kind, only silence. There for weeks, John walked through the village with hollow eyes, his clothes disheveled, his face gaunt. Margaret remained confined to her bed, mute as ever, her eyes glassy, her lips moving silently as though she carried on conversations with voices no one else could hear. Those who visited claimed that when she whispered, her words echoed faintly as if another voice were speaking with her, a second sound layered over her own, too soft to make out, yet impossible to ignore. The villagers avoided the Parker farmhouse after dark. Candles were seen burning in the upstairs windows long after midnight, and several neighbors swore they heard children's laughter drifting across the fields, though no children were there. On one occasion, a hunter returning late claimed to have seen two small figures at the edge of the wood. They stood side by side, motionless, their white dresses stark against the darkness. He shouted, but the figures did not move, and when lightning split the sky they vanished. He refused to walk that path ever again. By the winter of 1850, the Parker farm had become a place of dread. The fields went untended, the livestock thinned, and John rarely left the house. Some believed he was being punished by God for protecting the twins too long. Others pitied him, calling him a man broken by grief. But one cold evening, the truth, or something like it,
slipped out in a way no one could ignore. It happened at the church. John, unshaven and trembling, stumbled inside during a service, interrupting the preacher mid-sermon. His voice cracked as he shouted that the twins had returned. He claimed they came to him at night, that he woke to find them standing beside his bed, watching him. They did not speak, yet he could hear their voices inside his mind, speaking in perfect unison. He swore he could not endure it any longer, that the whispers were tearing at his soul. The congregation listened in stunned silence. Some tried to calm him, others prayed aloud, but John was inconsolable. His final words before collapsing at the altar sent chills through everyone present. "They are not my daughters anymore." 2 days later, John Parker was found hanging in his barn. No note, no explanation, only the rope, the silence, and the endless questions. With his death, the Parker farm was abandoned. Margaret was taken in by distant relatives in another county, though she never spoke a word until her own death years later. The farmhouse fell into ruin, its windows broken, its roof sagging, its fields overrun with weeds, and yet, no one dared go near it. But the story did not end there. In fact, it had only begun. In 1853, a group of children playing near the edge of the old Parker property returned home pale and shaken. They told their parents they had heard voices calling their names from the trees. 2 voices, exactly the same, whispering together. When the children turned, they saw 2 girls standing in the shadows holding hands. The girls looked identical, with long dark hair and pale faces, their eyes fixed on the children. Terrified, the children ran, but one swore that as they fled, the twins began to walk after them without making a sound, their feet gliding over the grass as if they weren't touching the ground at all. The tale spread quickly. Farmers began avoiding the road near the Parker land. Travelers passing through claimed they felt watched when they camped nearby. A merchant from Richmond who stayed a night in Cold Creek later wrote of a dream in which 2 girls entered his room and stood at the foot of his bed, staring silent. He woke drenched in sweat, only to find small muddy footprints on the wooden floorboards, though the door had never been opened. The village elders tried to dismiss the stories as hysteria, tales told by children, and fueled by gossip, but the incidents piled high. A hunter vanished while crossing the Parker woods. A farmer's wife, who lived closest to the abandoned property, fell into a deep madness, muttering constantly about 2 shadows that followed her everywhere she went. Even animals seemed to sense something. Horses refused to go near the Parker land. Dogs howled at night, their fur bristling as though something unseen moved through the fields. By the late 1850s, Cold Creek was no longer the quiet village it had been. Fear had become its defining feature. Parents warned their children never to wander near the Parker farm. Strangers who passed through often left in a hurry, unsettled by the atmosphere. The Parker twins had become less of a memory, and more of a legend, though one that still felt dangerously alive. Then came the night that cemented their story forever. It was autumn of 1859. Just before the war would tear the country apart, a school teacher by the name of Clara Whitfield moved into Cold Creek, young and eager to bring education to the small community. She was not a woman swayed by superstition. Having grown up in a city, she dismissed the villagers' stories as nonsense, the inventions of idle minds. When her students whispered about the Parker twins, she scolded them and told them to focus on their lesson. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and the last of the children filed out of the small schoolhouse, Clara noticed 2 girls lingering at the back of the room. They were not her students. She had never seen them before. Both wore simple, old-fashioned dresses, their dark hair parted down the middle. They stood side by side, their hands clasped, watching her with wide, unblinking eyes. Clara smiled politely and asked their names, assuming they belonged to a family new to the area. The girls did not answer. Instead, they tilted their heads in unison and whispered something so soft she could barely hear it. Her blood ran cold when she realized what they had said. They had spoken her name. No sound of footsteps, no door opening, no trace of movement, just silence. That night, Clara could not sleep. Every creak of the wooden house, every rustle of the wind outside, made her heart race. Around midnight, She sat upright in bed, convinced she had heard voices whispering in the darkness. She lit a lamp and checked every room, but found nothing. Finally, as she returned to her bed, she froze, their faces pale, their eyes gleaming in the lamplight, their hands still clasped, and together, in perfect unison, they spoke once more. This time, they did not whisper her name, they whispered a date. Clara fainted. When she awoke, the sun was rising and the girls were gone. She told no one of what she had seen, but in her private journal, found many years later, she wrote of her growing dread as the date they had spoken drew near. She wrote of hearing their voices in the hallways, of seeing them reflected in mirrors, of waking to find her name scrawled on scraps of paper she had not written herself. On the exact date the twins had whispered, Clara Whitfield was found dead in her bed, her face frozen in terror, her eyes wide open. No cause was ever discovered. From that moment, the legend of the Parker twins was sealed. They were no longer remembered as children at all, but as something else, something eternal. The village of Cold Creek lived under their shadow, year after year, decade after decade, as whispers continued to echo in the woods, as children claimed to see two pale figures watching from the tray line, as travelers spoke of unexplainable dreams. And yet, the strangest part of the story was this: though generations passed, those who claimed to see the twins always described them the same way, not older, not changed, but forever the same 7-year-old girls, who had vanished on that stormy night in.
The years slipped forward, and America itself began to fracture. By the early 1860s, war loomed like a thundercloud over the land, and even the quiet, haunted village of Cold Creek could not escape its reach. Young men marched away in gray and blue, and families wept at the train stations, wondering if they would ever see their sons again. Farms grew empty, fields untended, as war consumed everything. But amidst the chaos of the nation, the legend of the Parker twins did not fade. If anything, it grew. Soldiers passing through Cold Creek told stories of eerie lights flickering in the abandoned farmhouse. Scouts reported hearing children's laughter echoing through the trees at night. A Confederate officer who lodged in the village during the winter campaign of 1863 wrote a letter to his wife describing a most dreadful encounter. He claimed that while riding past the Parker land at dusk, he saw two girls standing on the porch of the rotting farmhouse. They raised their hands together, and his horse reared violently, throwing him into the mud. As he struggled to rise, he swore the girl's eyes glowed faintly in the dark. He left Cold Creek the next day, vowing never to return. That same winter, a Union soldier who deserted his regiment sought shelter in the abandoned farmhouse. He was never seen again. Weeks later, another patrol discovered his rifle leaning against the doorframe, his uniform neatly folded on the floor inside, but the man himself was gone, as though he had melted into the walls. The only clue was a message scratched into the wood of the table with shaking hands. "They watch me in my sleep." Stories like these spread beyond Cold Creek, carried on the lips of soldiers and wanderers. The Parker twins became part of a larger tapestry of ghost tales that haunted a nation torn apart. Yet in Cold Creek itself, the fear was sharper, more immediate. For the villagers, the twins were not a legend of the past, but a presence that remained, as real as the wind in the trees or the rain on the roof. After the war ended, Cold Creek was a shell of its former self. Many families had lost sons, fields lay barren, and poverty weighed heavily. But some swore the village carried another curse, not of hunger or loss, but of those two ever-present shadows. Children still whispered of voices calling to them at night. Farmers found footprints in the mud near their barns, though no one had walked there. Women claimed they saw two pale faces staring through their windows at twilight, only for the figures to vanish when they screamed. By 1871, a traveling preacher named Reverend Samuel Garrison came to Cold Creek. He was a stern man, known for his fiery sermons and his obsession with rooting out evil. When he heard the stories of the twins, he declared them works of the devil, and vowed to cleanse the land. Against the villagers' warnings, he led a group of men to the abandoned Parker farmhouse one night,
carrying torches and Bibles. What happened that night was never fully explained. The men entered the house, their voices echoing hymns into the crumbling halls, but within minutes, their singing faltered. The torches flickered violently, shadows danced across the walls, and a terrible sound filled the air. Laughter, high-pitched and echoing, not from one throat but two, blending perfectly together. Panic erupted. Some men fled into the night, dropping their torches as they ran. Reverend Garrison himself staggered out just before dawn, his hair gone white, his eyes wild with terror. He spoke only once more before collapsing, muttering the same words again and again. They spoke my sins aloud, every one of them in my own voice. He died 3 days later without regaining his senses. After that night, no one dared set foot in the farmhouse again. The villagers boarded up the doors and windows, nailed shut the cellar, and built a crude wooden cross in front of the property. But even with the house sealed, the voices did not stop. On stormy nights, people swore they could hear the faint sound of girls singing, a song with no words, carried on the wind, weaving through the trees. The strangest thing, though, was how the appearances of the twins always carried a sense of design. They did not show themselves to everyone. It was always someone specific, a widow grieving too long, a young man hiding a terrible secret, a child who had lied and caused another harm. The twins seemed drawn to those whose souls were burdened, and when they appeared they did not scream or threaten. They only stood together, hand in hand, and spoke, sometimes a name, sometimes a date, and whatever they spoke of always came to pass. In the 1880s, a young girl named Mary Ellen McClure vanished while walking home from school. Her friends told their parents that two strange girls had joined them on the path, holding hands and smiling silently. Mary Ellen had laughed nervously and asked who they were, but they did not answer. They only turned to her and whispered something in her ear. Moments later, she stepped into the woods, following them. Her friends screamed for her to come back, but she never emerged. A search party combed the forest for days, finding nothing but her ribbon, tangled in a branch. By then, Cold Creek was no longer a place people wished to live. Families left, one by one, moving to towns and cities where the air was heavy, but free of whispers. The Parker land was left to rot. The village shrank, leaving only a handful of stubborn souls who refused to abandon their homes. For them, the twins were not folklore but neighbors, unwanted, uninvited, but always there. And yet the strangest testimonies came not from those who feared the twins, but from those who swore they sought comfort in. In 1897, an elderly woman named Hester Dobbs confessed on her deathbed that she had seen the twins many times throughout her life, but unlike others, she did not shrink from them. She claimed that when her husband died in the war, the twins came to her in the night, standing by her bedside, whispering softly in unison, not curses, not threats, but words of comfort, as though they grieved with her. She swore she never told a soul, for fear of being called mad, but she insisted that the twins were not evil. They were something else entirely, something beyond human comprehension, tied to both suffering and solace. Her words divided those who heard them. Could it be that the twins were not harbingers of death, but messengers of something more complicated? Were they punishing the guilty and consoling the broken, or were they manipulating all who saw them, weaving confusion and terror in equal measure? As the 20th century dawned, Cold Creek was almost forgotten, a dot on the map swallowed by forest and time. But the stories of the Parker twins did not disappear. Travelers passing through claimed to hear the same voice. Families who moved into the surrounding area wrote of their children speaking of two new friends who played with them in the woods, friends no adult ever saw. And every so often, an obituary would appear in the local paper: a farmer dead in a field, a woman struck by illness, a man killed in a sudden accident, and someone quietly would mutter that the twins had spoken their names first. The Parker twins had become timeless. No matter the year, no matter the generation, they remained frozen as they had been in 1849. Two small girls, pale and identical, their hands always clasped, their voices always joined, and if the stories are true, they are still out there waiting. By the early 1900s, the nation had changed. The railroads stretched like veins across the land, the hum of factories filled the cities, and electricity crept into even the most remote corners of Virginia. Yet Cold Creek remained curiously still, a village caught in amber. The forest pressed close around it, the roads remained dirt, and though new inventions promised light and progress, the people of Cold Creek clung to their old ways. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps they knew better than most, that some shadows could not be banished by the flicker of an electric bulb. By then only a handful of families remained. The Parker farmhouse, sagging and skeletal, leaned into the earth, like a weary giant. Children no longer dared to play near it, though sometimes they swore they saw smoke rising from the crooked chimney, or a pale face peering from a shattered window. The villagers, tired of the whispers, avoided the subject altogether, but silence does not erase a story, it only gives it time to grow teeth. In 1907, a young school teacher named Thomas Reeves was hired to replace the aging educator of Cold Creek. He was a man of science, recently trained in Richmond, and he laughed at the old ghost tales. To him the villagers were bound by ignorance and fear, and he prided himself on bringing reason to their lives. When he heard the murmurs of the Parker twins, he dismissed them as childish nonsense. Superstition, he called it, fairy tales for the uneducated. But within months of his arrival, Reeves began to change. At first, it was subtle. He grew pale, distracted, his lessons halting. He often stared at the window as though expecting to see something outside. One evening, he staggered into the tavern, trembling and half drunk, declaring that two girls had followed him home from the schoolhouse. He claimed they had walked behind him the entire way, though when he turned to confront them, they were gone. The villagers, who had lived too long under the shadow of the twins, only lowered their eyes and said nothing. But Reeves would not let it go. He began writing letters to colleagues in Richmond, describing what he called a shared hallucination, afflicting the village. He believed it was a case study in mass hysteria, something to be dissected and explained. He wrote of hearing whispers at night, of finding muddy footprints on his porch, of waking to see two identical shadows stretching across his floor, though nothing stood between him and the lamplight. One letter, found years later, ended with a chilling line: "If this is hysteria, it has infected me as well. They know my name. They speak it in my sleep." In January of 1908, Thomas Reeves was discovered dead in his bed. His heart had stopped, though he was a healthy man in his prime. The doctor called it sudden failure, but those who found him swore his face was frozen in horror, his mouth open as though he had died mid-scream. On his desk, his journal lay open. The final page read, "They told me the day they were." The villagers buried him quickly, and spoke little of it afterward, but among themselves they whispered that the twins had claimed another. In the decades that followed, the legend of the Parker twins spread beyond Cold Creek. Folklorists, fascinated by tales of supernatural phenomena, came to document the story. Journalists wrote articles about the cursed village of Virginia. Skeptics visited, mocking the superstitions, only to leave shaken after a night spent near the Parker farm. Some claimed nothing happened at all. Others swore they had heard faint voices calling their names in the dark. One such visitor, a photographer from New York in 1921, sought to capture the legend on film. He spent 3 nights camping near the ruins of the Parker farmhouse, his camera ready. On the 3rd night, he returned to the village pale and silent, refusing to speak of what he had seen. But when his photographs were developed, one plate showed something no one could explain. In the background of a shot of the farmhouse, faint but unmistakable, stood 2 small figures, holding hands, their faces blurred as though caught mid-turn. The photographer destroyed the plate, and left Virginia the next morning. The Great Depression struck the nation hard in the 1930s, and Cold Creek was no exception. Families who had clung to the village for generations finally abandoned it in search of work elsewhere. By 1938, only a few homes remained occupied. The forest was reclaiming the land, swallowing paths and fields alike. Yet, even as the village emptied, the twins remained. In 1942, on the 100th anniversary of their birth, a group of local boys dared each other to spend the night in the Parker farmhouse. They were children of the last few families still living in Cold Creek, restless and eager for adventure. Armed with lanterns and bravado, they slipped into the rotting house. Hours later, One boy stumbled back into the village alone, hysterical and incoherent. It took days before he could speak clearly, and when he did, his words chilled the blood of everyone who heard them. They didn't want us there, he whispered. They didn't hurt us. They just spoke. They said things no one could know. Secrets. Sins. Every one of. And then they told me mine. I ran. I didn't look back. The other boys were never seen again. Search parties scoured the woods, dredged the river, tore apart the farmhouse plank by plank. No trace was found. The lone survivor refused to speak of it again and left Cold Creek as soon as he was old enough. By the 1950s, Cold Creek was nearly a ghost town. Only a few stubborn souls remained, and even they avoided speaking of the past. But outsiders continued to arise. Ghost hunters, writers, and thrill seekers came chasing the legend. Some left disappointed, others terrified. A handful vanished entirely, their names added to the long list of those who had walked into the Parker shadow and never returned. Perhaps the strangest account of the era came in 1963, from a traveling salesman whose car broke down near Cold Creek. Seeking shelter, he wandered into the woods and stumbled upon the ruins of the Parker farmhouse. He later claimed he heard laughter, echoing from within, the laughter of two children. He stepped inside, his flashlight trembling, and saw two small girls standing on the staircase. He asked if they were lost, but they only smiled and whispered his name. When asked how they could possibly know it, he shuddered and said, "They didn't whisper my first name. They whispered the one my mother used to call me, the one no one else knew." He fled the village on foot, abandoning his car. Years later, he told the story again, and each time his voice broke when he reached the part about the name. By then the Parker twins were more than a local legend. They had become part of American folklore, whispered of in books, retold around campfires, adapted into stories that blurred truth and fiction. But for those few who still lived near the husk of Cold Creek, the legend was no story. It was a truth that lingered, a truth they endured. Some said the twins had become something like a mirror. They did not kill without reason. They revealed what was hidden, brought darkness to light, and confronted people with the truths they had buried. And yet, others insisted they were predators, feeding on fear, binding themselves tighter to the living. With every whisper of a name, they were still children, still holding hands, still speaking in perfect unison. And every generation brought new stories, new witnesses, new victims. And then came the modern age, cameras, recordings, and the relentless pursuit of proof. But some truths do not wish to be captured.
By the 1970s, the world had changed beyond recognition. Men had walked on the moon, machines carried voices across oceans, and color televisions flickered in homes from coast to coast. People laughed at old ghost stories, calling them relics of simpler times, the kinds of tales meant to frighten children before bed. Yet in the hollow shell of Cold Creek, the Parker twins remained. The farmhouse still stood, though the roof sagged deeper, the boards warped with rain and rot, trees clawed at its frame, vines smothered its porch, and the air around it seemed permanently heavy. Most avoided it altogether, but for a new generation of seekers, it was irresistible. Paranormal research was gaining traction. Television specials investigated haunted houses, universities quietly funded studies into psychic phenomena, and amateur ghost hunters armed themselves with tape recorders and cameras. To them, Cold Creek was not a forgotten tragedy. It was an opportunity. In 1973, a small group of researchers from a Virginia college arrived to document the legend of the Parker twins. They came with notebooks, microphones, and the arrogance of academics. The villagers who remained, only a handful of families by then, warned them not to stay in the farmhouse overnight, but the group laughed it off. "We'll prove this is all hysteria," their leader, Professor Henry Caldwell, declared. Nothing more than folklore. That night, they set up camp in the crumbling house. One student placed microphones in each room, while another rigged a bulky reel-to-reel recorder in the parlor. Caldwell paced, explaining to the others how fear created illusions, how expectations shaped perception. But as midnight approached, the atmosphere shifted. The wind died, the forest fell silent, and a strange chill seeped through the boards. The first sound came just after 1 a.m., a faint tapping like fingernails on wood. The students laughed nervously, chalking it up to settling beams. Then came the voices, two of them high and soft, weaving through the static of the recorder, perfectly synchronized. They whispered the names of each person in the group. One by one, the students panicked. Some swore they heard the voices in their own ears, not just on the tape. One girl screamed that she saw two pale figures in the doorway, watching silently. In the chaos, equipment toppled, lanterns flickered, and one microphone captured a sound that chilled every listener who heard it later. Laughter, two identical laughs, layered perfectly, fading into silence. By dawn, the researchers fled, pale and shaken. They refused to speak of it publicly, but whispers spread through the college. Caldwell, once a skeptic, withdrew from his work, growing paranoid and withdrawn. Months later, he was found dead in his office. On his desk lay a single page, scrawled in uneven handwriting. They told me my truth. I could not bear it. The recordings, however, survived, passed quietly between students, then copied and shared. They became something of an underground relic. Those who listened swore they could hear their own names whispered faintly in the background, hidden beneath the static. Others insisted the tape changed each time it played, as though the voices shifted to address whoever was listening. Eventually the original reel vanished, locked away or destroyed. No one knows, but the legend of the Parker twins had entered a new era. In the 1980s, ghost hunters arrived with camcorders and infrared lights. They prowled the Parker farmhouse, hoping to catch evidence on film. Some captured flickers of movement, shadows crossing walls where no one stood. Others claimed to hear footsteps circling them in empty rooms. A few recorded faint voices, always two, always in unison, but no clear images of the twins ever emerged. Cameras malfunctioned, film burned white, batteries drained instantly. It was as though the very air of the farmhouse rejected being captured. One particularly infamous case came in 1987, when a team from a television program called America's Haunted Places filmed an episode in Cold Creek. The crew set up lights, cameras and a dramatic host to narrate it to Parker legend. During the night, while recording in the cellar, one cameraman collapsed. He was rushed to a hospital, raving about two little girls who stood inches from his face, their eyes black, their voices inside his head. He never worked again, and the episode was shelved, deemed too disturbing to air. Rumors claimed that in the raw footage, which was later locked away, two faint figures could be seen standing behind the host, unnoticed at the time of filming. By the 1990s, the Parker twins were internet fodder. Message boards and early forums buzzed with tales of the cursed farmhouse. Some posted photographs claiming to show their faces in broken windows. Others shared audio clips of whispers recorded near the woods. Skeptics mocked it, but the stories spread like wildfire. The legend was no longer confined to Cold Creek. It had become part of a wider cultural obsession with the paranormal. Yet for the few who still lived near the ruins, it was no entertainment. They continued to hear the voices on stormy nights. Children claimed to see two girls at the edge of the trees, watching with cold smiles. Farmers reported finding strange symbols scratched into their barns, symbols they swore matched marks inside the Parker house. And always, when the twins appeared, someone in the village suffered soon after. An accident, an illness, a sudden death. One chilling account came from 1999. When a truck driver broke down on the road near Cold Creek. As he walked toward the village, night closing in, he noticed two small figures standing ahead on the road. Thinking they were children in need, he approached. The girls turned, their faces pale, their hands locked together. They whispered his name, not the one on his license, not the one his friends called him, but the nickname his grandmother had used when he was a boy. He froze,
heart pounding, and when headlights from another car flashed across the road, the girls vanished. Weeks later, the driver died in a collision on the same stretch of road. It was as though the twins had woven themselves into the fabric of time, adapting to each new era, always watching, always whispering. They could not be recorded clearly, could not be explained, could not be stopped. They appeared when they chose, to whom they chose, and what they spoke of always came to pass. And so, as the 21st century dawned, the question lingered: were they ghosts bound to the tragedy of their childhood, or something far older, far more powerful, using the guise of children to move through the ages unseen? What is certain is that those who crossed their path never forgot the sound of their voices, two whispers, perfectly joined, carrying truths no one wished to hear. By the early 2000s, the world had grown small. The internet connected strangers across continents. Secrets spread faster than they could be buried, and the Parker twins, once a whispered legend in an isolated valley, had become a digital ghost story. Teenagers on online forums traded grainy photos of the farmhouse, daring one another to spend a night there. Amateur investigators uploaded shaky videos of the ruins to YouTube, claiming to hear whispers in the background. Some were hoaxes, but not all. One of the first viral clips came into a group of college students from Ohio filmed themselves entering the farmhouse with a handheld camera. The footage was crude, shaky light beams cutting through dust and shadows. They laughed nervously, mocking the legend, until one girl froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The others hushed. On the recording, faintly but unmistakably, came two voices, speaking in unison. The words were distorted, but some claimed to hear names. Others swore they heard a countdown. The camera jerked violently. The screen filled with static, and the video ended. When it was uploaded, viewers across the internet reported strange experiences. Some swore they heard their own names in the whispers. Others claimed their computers froze, or screens flickered when the video reached its final second. The original file vanished within days, taken down without explanation, but copies circulated endlessly. To this day, fragments of that video still surface on obscure corners of the internet, often corrupted, always unsettling. In 2008, a group of paranormal investigators, equipped with modern gadgets like EMF detectors, thermal cameras and digital recorders, staged a live-streamed investigation of the Parker farmhouse. Thousands tuned in as they wandered through the rotting halls. For the first hour, nothing happened beyond creaking boards and the occasional rustle of bats. Then, in the cellar, one investigator stopped dead. Her face went pale. She whispered. The two girls were standing in the corner, holding hands, staring directly at her. The live stream audience saw nothing, just an empty patch of shadow, but the woman dropped her equipment and fled, screaming. Moments later, audio cut out entirely, replaced by faint stat. Viewers began typing frantically in the chat, claiming they could hear children's laughter faintly layered over the static. When sound returned, the team was in disarray. The investigator, who had fled, was gone, her flashlight abandoned on the cellar floor. Police later found her outside in the woods, barefoot, shivering, muttering over and over, "They know me. They know my truth." She never explained further. As technology advanced, so too did the legend. In the 2010s, the Parker twins became a staple of creepypasta threads, paranormal YouTube channels, and Reddit horror communities. People posted elaborate theories that the twins were not ghosts, but harbingers, beings that warned of death before it came. Others insisted they were echoes of something older, spirits that had taken the tragedy of 1871 and worn it like a mask. A few claimed they were still alive, not in flesh, but in memory, feeding on the belief of each new generation. But there were always those who swore the stories were more than fiction. Travelers passing through Cold Creek reported seeing two girls at the edge of the woods, watching silently. Photographers claimed to capture faint outlines of small figures in their shot. Most chilling of all were the emails and forum posts, from people who said the twins had visited them, not in the farmhouse, not in the valley, but in their own homes. One widely circulated post appeared on Reddit in 2014. The user, anonymous, described waking at 3 to find two girls standing at the foot of his bed. They were pale, dressed in tattered 19th century nightgowns, their hands clasped tightly together. They spoke in unison, whispering a secret about his future, something he refused to share. Days later, the account was deleted. Weeks later, news surfaced of a man matching his description, dying in a car crash under bizarre circumstances. Other stories emerged from those who sought the twins deliberately. Ghost hunters who set up recorders in their own homes claimed to capture whispers in the background of ordinary sounds. Some uploaded the clips online, and listeners swore the voices changed depending on who was hearing them. A woman in London insisted the twins said her childhood nickname, a name she hadn't heard in decades. A man in Texas swore they recited the address of his grandparents' farm. It was as if the voices reached across oceans, bending technology to deliver their truths. But perhaps the most terrifying modern account came in 2017. They spent weeks in the area, interviewing locals, combing through archives, exploring the farmhouse ruins. On the final night of shooting, they left a camera running in the cellar, while the crew packed up outside. The footage, later leaked online, showed two faint figures entering the frame, small, thin, their outlines blurred but unmistakably human. They stood together, facing the camera, hands locked. For nearly a minute, they remained perfectly still before stepping closer, the audio filled with static. Then, in perfect unison, two voices whispered, "You are already ours." The screen went black. The leaked footage spread like wildfire, before being scrubbed from platforms one by one. Some claimed legal action forced its removal. Others whispered the footage itself was cursed. Those who had seen it insisted the faces of the twins were never clear, always shifting, always slightly wrong, as if no camera could truly capture what they were. By the late 2010s, Cold Creek was abandoned entirely. The last families had left, tired of living with shadows. The farmhouse collapsed into itself, a heap of wood and stone slowly reclaimed by the forest. Yet even as the building rotted away, the legend grew stronger. Visitors reported hearing laughter in the empty valley. Drivers on nearby highways claimed to see two girls walking along the road at night, only for them to vanish as headlights drew near. The twins no longer seemed bound to the house. They had become something else, untethered, free to appear wherever they pleased. And through it all, one truth remained constant. Those who encountered the Parker twins never escaped unchanged. Some died suddenly, some lost their sanity, some carried secrets so unbearable that they chose silence forever. The twins whispered truths no one wanted to know, truths that gnawed at the soul until it cracked. It is said that if you speak of them too often, if you let their names linger on your tongue, they will hear, and if they hear, they will come, not to haunt, not to play, but to reveal the one thing you fear most, the truth you cannot bear.
By the time the 2020s arrived, the Parker twins had crossed fully into the bloodstream of digital culture. They were no longer just a regional ghost story or a legend whispered on internet forums. They had become an online phenomenon, their story retold in TikTok narrations, creepypasta podcasts, and horror YouTube channels with millions of views. Hashtags like Parker Twins Challenge trended briefly, with teenagers daring one another to whisper the girls' names 3 times at 3 a.m. while recording themselves. Most videos were jokes, staged frights, nothing more than entertainment, but every so often, one clip slipped through that didn't feel staged at all. In late 2020, a teenager in Michigan uploaded a TikTok where she attempted the challenge in her bedroom. At first she laughed, rolling her eyes at the camera. She whispered the names twice, then paused, clearly nervous. On the third time, something flickered in the mirror behind her, her face drained of color. She leaned in close to the phone, her voice trembling. "They're here." The screen glitched, freezing mid-frame, then cut to black. The video stayed online for only a few hours before disappearing, but copy spread quickly, and those who watched insisted they could see two pale figures in the reflection, standing just behind the girl. Some users claimed their phones crashed after viewing it. Others swore they heard whispering through their headphones, words that didn't match what was on screen. Within weeks, the girl's account was gone, her other videos deleted, her name untraceable. As more strange clips circulated, online communities grew obsessed. Subreddits dedicated to the twins exploded with theories. Were they tied to Cold Creek, or had the internet itself become their new home? Could an image or a video carry them into your life? One theory argued that the twins had evolved beyond traditional haunting, using digital technology as their conduit, able to appear in any household where their story was told. It explained why their appearances seemed to multiply with each retelling. The more people shared, the stronger they became. In 2021, a live stream on Twitch took the legend to another level. A group of paranormal streamers traveled to the ruins of Cold Creek, setting up cameras to broadcast a 24-hour vigil in the valley. Thousands of viewers tuned in, watching as the team joked, explored, and waited for something to happen. For hours, the chat filled with bored messages, but around 3 a.m., the feed glitched. Static filled the screen, then cleared. The camera in the cellar, little more than a dirt pit by then, showed two figures standing side by side. The chat exploded. Thousands of viewers typed frantically, spamming messages. "Do you see them?" Some said the girls were clear as day. Others insisted the screen was blank. A chilling split formed. Half the audience saw the twins, half saw nothing at all. Those who saw them described the same details: two small girls, holding hands, with hollow faces, and mouths that seemed to move in silence. Then the feed froze. When it resumed, the cellar was empty again. The streamers above ground claimed they had heard nothing, seen nothing, and when they checked the cellar themselves, it was vacant. But the strangest part came afterward. Dozens of viewers reported nightmares that night. In their dreams, they saw the twins at the foot of their beds, whispering. Some woke screaming. A handful swore the girls had told them personal details no one else could know, secrets, hidden shames, or glimpses of futures they did not want. At least 2 viewers deleted their accounts and vanished from online communities entirely, leaving behind only a final post. "They told me the truth, and I cannot live with it." By 2022, the Parker twins had become more than just a horror trend. Psychologists wrote articles on digital folklore hysteria, comparing the twins to earlier legends like Slender Man, yet admitting something about this case felt different. Unlike Slender Man, who was born from fiction, the Parker twins had roots in verifiable tragedy. The 1871 fire, the Cold Creek farmhouse, archived deaths. The myth had documentation behind it, and that gave it power. Even skeptics admitted the sheer volume of strange coincidences surrounding the twins was unnerving. The twins also began to seep into popular culture. A streaming service announced a dramatized series based on their legend, though production shut down abruptly after a crew member suffered a breakdown, claiming to have seen 2 children on set, who were not part of the cast. Musicians sampled the alleged whispers in songs, only for the tracks to be pulled after listeners reported seizures and hallucinations. One VR horror game briefly included a level inspired by the Parker farmhouse, but players complained of hearing whispers even with their headsets removed. The level was patched out, but rumors spread that fragments of the code still carried something within them. And yet, despite warnings, curiosity only grew. The Parker twins had become a challenge, a forbidden ritual wrapped in internet. Young influencers sought them out deliberately, convinced they could turn the legend into content. Some uploaded encounters that were easily dismissed as hoaxes. Others uploaded nothing at all, their channels suddenly inactive. In 2023, a chilling story broke on a niche paranormal podcast. A man claimed his younger sister, a TikToker with a small following, had vanished after attempting to summon the twins for her audience. Days later, her phone was found on the floor of her locked bedroom, still recorded. The footage showed her speaking to the camera, laughing nervously, whispering the names. At first, nothing happened. Then faintly,
Two small voices responded, overlapping with her own. The girl froze, staring at something off camera, and whispered, "I didn't want to know, please don't tell me." The screen shook violently, and the video ended. Authorities treated the case as a missing person investigation. No evidence of forced entry, no signs of struggle. Her brother insisted she had been taken, not by a person, but by the twins themselves. The phone was confiscated, the footage sealed, only a handful of screenshots leaked, blurry and distorted, yet enough to keep the story alive. By 2024, whispers about the twins had taken a darker turn. No longer content to haunt valleys, farmhouses or abandoned basements, they seemed to be appearing anywhere their story was told. Listeners to certain podcasts claimed to hear extra voices layered into the audio. Viewers of certain YouTube videos swore the twins appeared in single frames, too fast for the human eye, but visible when paused. Even those who researched them casually sometimes reported strange happenings, flickering lights, phantom laughter, dreams of two pale children standing hand in hand at the edge of their beds. And so the story persists into the present, spreading wider each year. The Parker twins have become both folklore and fact, myth and memory, a legend that evolves with every retelling. Some believe they are a curse carried by technology, woven into the very data of the internet itself. Others insist they are still just children, lost in the fire of 1871, searching endlessly for someone who will finally listen to their truth. But there is one warning that appears again and again across all accounts, from 19th century diaries to modern Reddit threads. Once you speak of them, once you hear their whispers, they will know you, they will remember you, they will come to you, not tonight, not tomorrow, but eventually. And when they do, they will reveal the truth you fear most. Some say you can resist them by refusing to listen. Others claim ignorance makes no difference at all. The Parker twins are patient. They will wait. They will return. And perhaps even now, they are already here, watching from the shadows just beyond your screen, their hands clasped tightly, their whispers ready for the moment you are alone enough to hear them. Because every story ends the same way. You can deny them. You can laugh. You can forget. But sooner or later, the twins will find you. And when they do, they will show you the one truth you cannot bear. And now you know the story of the Parker twins. But remember this. Every person who speaks their names becomes part of their legend. You've heard their whispers tonight. And they've heard you too. Maybe not now. Maybe not tomorrow. But one night when the room is quiet, and the light flickers, you'll feel them standing there. Two small hands clasped together. Two hollow voices waiting to tell you the truth you fear the most.